that there are great marvels and great men in the world. And then there is Donald Trump, who paused his God complex and endless comparisons to Jesus, Alexei Navalny, and Abraham Lincoln to compare himself to another man far greater than him, Nelson Mandela. Over the weekend, Trump once again claimed victimhood. He did so while again attacking Judge Juan Marchand, who is overseeing the hush money election interference trial that's set to start next week. Trump posted the following on his scam website, Truth Social, quote, "If this partisan hack wants to put me in the clink for speaking the open and obvious truth, I will gladly become a modern-day Nelson Mandela. It will be my great honor." Well, before I go any further, it might be helpful for us, and for Trump specifically, to remember who exactly Nelson Mandela was and what he did for his country and the world. Unlike Donald Trump, Nelson Mandela was a man of great humility, decency, and courage. And while he was born into actual African royalty, Mandela remained a man of modest means who slept on mats and used his elbows for pillows. His father did not give him great wealth. What he did give him was his hand-me-down clothing. It was in the late 1940s when the Afrikaner Nationalist Party won the whites-only general election and began implementing apartheid across South Africa that Mandela's path would change. It was then that he decided that he would dedicate his life to opposing apartheid legislation, which subjugated South Africa's black majority. His fight for freedom from oppression made him a target by white Afrikaners. The fight against apartheid escalated over the next decade, leading to the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, in which white police fired into a crowd of peaceful protesters, killing 69 people. That led Mandela and other African leaders to mount general strikes and protests, which led to more escalation and a ban not just on strikes and protests, but on Mandela's African National Congress itself. In 1964, Mandela received a life sentence, not for trying to overturn an election, but for protesting the fact that Africans, who were 80% of the population in an African country, were not allowed to participate in them. He narrowly escaped the death penalty on charges that included treason, and he spent 27 years in prison, hidden from the world, because his calls for equality were deemed a threat to white supremacy, including in the United States, where Mandela was labeled a terrorist by the Reagan administration. He was released from prison in 1990 to become the country's first black president. But before he was sentenced, Mandela recited the following from memory. "During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Up until 2008, the United States continued to officially deem Nelson Mandela a terrorist, with the state and defense departments declaring the African National Congress to be a terrorist group. Mandela's name remained on the U.S. terrorism watch list, even after he was sworn in as president. Donald Trump is no Nelson Mandela. In fact, Trump is currently leading a party that has declared that white people are the real victims of racism and that black and brown people are dirty animals from S-hole countries who deserve to be placed in internment camps or shot either at the border or at protests for daring to ask for what Nelson Mandela was asking for: justice and equality. This weekend, Trump kept up his racist diatribes while speaking to a gathering of uber-wealthy Republican donors and defending his previous comments that people from African countries like Haiti and South Africa are S-hole countries. He reportedly defended those comments by saying, why can't we allow people to come in from nice countries, like Denmark, Switzerland? Do we have any people coming in from Denmark? How about Switzerland? How about Norway? Countries that just so happen to be overwhelmingly white. What do these millionaires get in exchange for Trump's blatant racism, xenophobia, criminality, and violence? Well, a promise to extend their tax cuts, which are set to expire in 2025. What do those people give up for Trump's promise to maintain their precious tax cuts, aside from their dignity and their morality? Well, just a little over $500,000 each in donations to his campaign. And boy, was his campaign eager to crow about it. Lara Trump, the daughter-in-law, gloated that they doubled the amount that the Biden-Harris campaign raised just 2 weeks ago. Well, the Biden campaign and Democrats did indeed raise $26 million in a single night last week, using a diversity of high-wattage celebrities and former presidents Clinton and Obama. The money they raised came from 5,000 people who paid anywhere from $225 to $500,000, leaving the Biden campaign with far more cash on hand than the Trump campaign, which the Biden-Harris campaign is using on television ads and for opening field offices in key states around the country. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign will be spending a significant portion of their fundraising haul from, 100 and some odd people, on Trump's legal defense fund, which includes more pathetically desperate attempts to delay next week's trial. Today, he tried to postpone the trial while arguing to move the venue, a motion that was denied. He's also suing to have Judge Juan Marchand removed from the case and to have the gag order lifted. We also learned what else Trump's crony friends have given him. And according to the Daily Beast, it's apparently a dubious $175 million bond that doesn't actually promise that it will even pay the money if the former president loses his $464 million fraud case on appeal. Again, that man is no Mandela. Joining me now is Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation on MSNBC. David Jolly, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican congressman who's no longer affiliated with the party. And Catherine Christian, MSNBC legal analyst and former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney. Thank you both, all three, for being here. Reverend Sharpton, Big Brother Rev, please, I'm going to just let you have the floor to comment on Donald Trump having the raw nerve to compare himself to a man that you actually got a chance to know, Nelson Mandela.
Well, it is atrocious. First of all, Nelson Mandela went to jail trying to fight to get people of color, black people in South Africa, the right to vote in their own land. Donald Trump is facing charges, particularly in Georgia, of trying to deny those that had voted in the election there and try to disenfranchise them by trying to get votes that allegedly never happened. I was an election observer in 1994 in South Africa, and I could not imagine Nelson Mandela, who I did get to speak with and know when my visits there and his visits here. I couldn't imagine him calling saying, I need 11,000 more votes out of Durban. Can you help me? I need some more votes out of Cape Town. To try and belittle a man who literally changed the democracy as we now witness in South Africa to a man who tried to undermine a democracy is to desecrate the whole movement of democracy around the world. Even for Donald Trump, this is lower than anything I could have imagined, to compare himself to someone who is not only unlike him, but fought for the exact opposite of what he has demonstrated in his own maneuvers to undermine black voters and, for that matter, undervoters, to the point where he's under indictment for doing something. Nelson Mandela became inducted in a global Hall of Fame of freedom fighters. Donald Trump has been indicted in 4 different federal districts among the charges trying to undermine people's right to vote or the value of those that did vote.
Yeah, I mean, David Jolly, it feels to me like there is this sort of movement on the MAGA right to take all of the iconic movements for black liberation and flip them and, sort of conscript them in what Donald Trump is losing, which is a movement for white domination. To compare yourself to Mandela is real ironic when the Sharpeville massacre was white police shooting at black peaceful demonstrators, when Donald Trump has said American police should do the same to black demonstrators. When Nelson Mandela, as Reverend Sharpton has said, was fighting to get the 80% majority black population the right to vote, when only the 15% white voters in that country were allowed to vote, Donald Trump is doing the opposite. All of his election denial was about places where black and brown people live and saying those people's votes were inherently illegitimate. And his former guy, Stephen Miller, literally made a fake civil rights organization that's suing to stop black people from getting everything from grants to jobs to even grants to each other, and saying that only white people should get anything economically in this country. This is the new Republican Party, though, David. They are literally leading a white nationalist movement grafted onto the Republican Party. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a cult parked inside a political party, and I don't think there's much more to add to what Rev said other than amen. I mean, in Nelson Mandela, you have someone working for the equality of all people, willing to give his own life. And Donald Trump, you have someone trying to interrupt equality for all people. And Joy, last week we were laughing at that Donald Trump was jealous of Jesus Christ. This week he's jealous of Nelson Mandela. I would say the Prophet Muhammad and Gandhi are next, except Donald Trump probably doesn't appreciate their heritage, so he may not go there. And look, I would say this. I mean, you're exactly right about the state of today's Republican Party and Trumpism. I mean, they are elevating someone who is racist, misogynist, xenophobic, and bigoted. Those are Mitt Romney's words. And in elevating him, they are sleepwalking towards a dictatorship. And those are Liz Cheney's own words. And you see in Romney and Cheney and others, people who have stepped aside from mainstream MAGA republicanism because they see in Donald Trump exactly who you and the Rev have articulated. You know, we fall short in seeing this as merely an election. This is a transitional moment in November for the country if we elevate someone who is racist, misogynistic, xenophobic, bigoted, who wants to return to a dictatorship. That is the question for the American people in November.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.